Okay, again, welcome everyone to Wheaton Conversations. This evening we have Charlotte Potter and Kim Harty. My name's Marcy Peterson and I've been with WheatonArts since 1994. I'm the IT director and I'll be with you throughout the evening to answer questions in the chat. And everyone can take a couple minutes to settle in. We have a couple of announcements before we start the program. Again, we'd love to hear where everyone is joining us from. Please note your location in the chat feature. WheatonArts is thrilled to celebrate our 50th anniversary as one of the most unusual and creative landmarks in the Northeast, founded by glass magnate Frank H. Wheaton. The first buildings were opened to the public in 1970. WheatonArts, 50 years later, WheatonArts has become an international hub for artists exploring the limits of their creativity and a reception for the region's cultural diversity. It has additionally earned regional, national, and international recognition for its unique collections and programs. And in the chat, I'll be placing a link so that you can also register for the next Wheaton conversation, and that'll be on December 3rd with Norwood Viviano and Dr. Jennifer Kitson. Dr. Norwood Viviano will share his artistic process and the evolution of his work following the WheatonArts residency, including a new collaborative project with Dr. Jen Kitson. Together, they set out to generate new understanding of place through research and creative response. I'm going to go over a couple tech tips with you just to give you that comfortable experience, and again, to let you know that you can ask questions in the chat box. This is a webinar, so you will not be seen. The host, Pamela Wakeman, and the guests will be on camera. You can ask questions in the Q&A. That window is different from the chat. As an attendee, you can also like other attendees' questions. And in the chat box, you can follow along for links for additional resources, and you can text between attendees in the chat box. I want to assure you, if you lose connection for any reason, you can simply close those windows and go back to your email, click on that email, and you'll join us again. This session is being recorded, and again, it's a webinar, so that will be the host and the speakers that will be recorded. I wanted to remind you that there are 3 types of support for WheatonArts, and that's membership, donations, and shopwheatonarts.org. If you'd like more information on ways to give, please contact Rhody Barron, our Director of Development, and I'll be putting her information into the chat box. I mentioned memberships, and I want to assure you that members do get it all. I won't go over all of this, but remind you that gift memberships are always available. And it is still pumpkin season for a little while longer at WheatonArts. We are open on Saturdays and Sundays, 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. And you can visit the Museum of American Glass, the Down Jersey Folklife Center, and the museum stores when you come in person to visit. You can also shop.wheatonarts.org and see what we have to offer there. And also buy tickets in advance. You can get them at the gate, but you can also use the website to get them in advance. And without further announcements, I'm going to introduce Pamela Wakeman, and she'll get the program started. Hi, Pamela. Pamela Wakeman is a ceramic artist, arts administrator, and educator. She has taught for Rome University and WheatonArts. You may have met her running the family activities on site. She received her Bachelor of Fine Art at Rowan University and her Master of Science at Drexel University. Her favorite thing about teaching and creating art is the challenge it presents to find new approaches to understanding and interpreting the world around us. And over to you, Pam.
Thanks, Marcy, for that wonderful introduction. Hello, everybody. It is my pleasure to be with you here tonight and to introduce our guests. Our first guest is Charlotte Potter-Kasich. She's an arts administrator, conceptual artist, and designer who has shaped her professional practice around her curiosity, passion, and enthusiasm about glass. Gravitating toward glass as a material and inspiration because of its ability to hold a dual identity as hot and cold, fragile and strong, elastic and brittle, her works materialize as installation, sculpture, performance, and video. Currently, Charlotte is the interim director at the Berry Museum in Norfolk, Virginia. Our second guest tonight is Kim Harty. She is an artist and scholar whose work investigates the connection between craft and performance through sculpture, installation, video, and performance. She is heavily informed by her training as a glassblower and is interested in undoing traditional methods of making and investigating how materials can confound their expected function. Kim is the chair of Craft and Materials Studies and section head and assistant professor of glass at the College for Creative Studies in Detroit, Michigan. If you would like to learn more about Charlotte and Kim beyond this webinar, you can visit their websites. Charlotte's is charlottepotter.com. and Kim's is kimharty.com. And I think we can post those in the chat. So if you guys want to click on them and save them for later, you can do so. Thank you both for joining us. I'm excited and thrilled to have you both here with us tonight.
Great. Thank you so much, Pam and Marcy, for the beautiful introduction. So hi, I'm Charlotte Potter-Kasich, and I'm here with Kim Harty. We're gonna chat with you this evening. We're gonna talk about art, but we're also gonna talk about life.
Yeah, so we've kind of structured the presentation into 3 different sections. We're gonna start talking about our collaboration that sort of brought us together as friends and as artists at WheatonArts. We're going to talk a little bit about our individual work and our individual practice and how that was informed by our time at Wheaton. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about, our life in the institution, in my case, at the College for Creative Studies and in Charlotte's at the Berry Art Museum and some of the other institutions that we've worked with as administrators or educators and outside of our studio practice. So in between each kind of section, we're going to take a pause if people want to ask questions, but we'll also do a Q&A at the end. But we just kind of want to break it up with some opportunities to chat and have a discussion.
And can I jump in here real quick, guys? If people do want to ask questions, you can do so through the Q&A feature at the bottom of Zoom. So just click that and I'll be keeping my eye out to see those questions filtering through, okay?
Great. So the Cirque du Verre, I guess we'll start here. Kim and I were lucky enough to both be residents at the same time at Wheaton Arts and Cultural Center. And although we had met previously at Pilchuck Glass School, this was a really formative moment for the both of us to be able to have an opportunity to have unlimited resources, time, so much time, and a team that could help us kind of make anything come true. The Cirque du Verre is a project that we created with the 3rd resident artist who was there at the same time, Rika Haas. And Wheaton has this sort of interesting model where it asks its resident artists to do a public presentation, which is pretty typical for a glassblowing institution. But it was in a kind of tongue-in-cheek way, we decided our response was going to be to literally create a circus. Because if you think about it, how many other artists are asked to literally do a dog and pony show for the public? Glassblowing is such a performative medium. And so it was a really interesting opportunity for us to play around in a very safe space with a lot of different ideas.
Yeah, so the first Cirque de Verre, which went on to have performances at different museums and nonprofits across the country, took place at WheatonArts. And as Charlotte mentioned, it was a really fortuitous opportunity because we had the 3 residents who were kind of masterminding, but we also had this team of assistants and the ability to actually practice and rehearse. And what we did was we had 5 acts or something like that. If you go to the actually back 2 slides, our little postcards, you can see down in the corner, the synchro blow, the freak show menagerie, the world's strongest woman. Those were all performance acts that we had. And then in between those acts, we had our kind of recorded slide lecture that was more traditional that they would play for the audience. So on the next slide, that's what the big screen is in the center. But you can see what I love about this slide is that it shows the hot shop transforming into a stage. And I think that this really kind of captures that transformation in this case.
So here's just a few images of a few of the acts. This was the 2-headed glass blower. There's Rika Haas and Josh. Who was Josh?
Turner. Josh Turner.
Turner, this artist. This is a duet on the left. This was me and Kim's sort of duet. I was the donkey and she was the elephant. It was a little farce. And we don't need to read too much into that.
It was 2008, an election year.
It was. And we made glass spheres and we popped each other's balloons. It was a little staged who was going to win. And then we did a fire dance that Rika had taught us all how to do, along with fire breathing and things like that. This is documentation. This is Ben Wright and Doreen Garner, who've both gone on to have incredible practices. A ton of different artists started to join in our team over time and each developed their own acts. But this is from the Goggle Factory. Goggleworks?
Goggleworks, yeah, in Reading, PA, yeah.
Which is a really incredible performance for us. And each one was a little bit different. We would often pull different artists in regionally. So we started kind of curating and also kind of helping people produce performative acts. So in a lot of ways, we were encouraging our friends and colleagues to start to consider ways in which their practice might start to take a center stage.
Yeah, and I think one of the core questions for us was thinking about the line between art and entertainment. Because as Charlotte mentioned, at many glass institutions and glass museums, the artist is often requested to work for the public and actually becomes a spectacle for the public. And so that creates a kind of power dynamic when you're making your work and what the expectation of what you would be making is, particularly when it's glass. Sometimes there's this expectation that it needs to be this very flamboyant, beautiful process. It is a beautiful process, but also art making can be very boring at times, very monotonous, very underwhelming in the making process. And I think part of what we were questioning was this line between art and entertainment, and also thinking about the hot shop as a space for work to occur, because we were familiar with all of these kind of amazing happenings, you could say, that happen in hot shops, Pilchup, Urban Glass, Wheaton, but there's never actually a considered space where there's an audience who can really experience that performance. And I think that was also part of the impulse to create the Cirque de Verre. Some of it was very tongue-in-cheek and silly, but other pieces, like the one we're looking at with Sam Gear, was actually, you know, a performance that was like very core to his practice, where what he did, I mean, it was bananas. He poured a ladle of glass through a bicycle wheel, and he had been hoisted up in a shopping cart about 12 feet, you know, above the hot shop floor, and it made this really beautiful spiraling rain of glass. So I think there was a little bit of both the silly and the really serious in this format.
Absolutely, and incredible material studies that are performative. And one thing, I mean, it's a shameless plug, but it's an important one. Not many institutions would have allowed us to do something like this, to hoist somebody from the center of their hot shop floor. I mean, there's all kinds of safety potential issues. There's all kinds of insurance liability. Wheaton took a lot of risks with us. They let us try a lot of things. I think that we learned a lot. I've taken a lot of this knowledge forward into other institutions we worked in to try to put all of the right measures forward so that we can be really experimental, and also let people know that although it seems really dangerous, it's actually very safe. It's extremely rehearsed and extremely practiced.
So this was a piece that I was really excited about at the time because it was a piece that really took the interest of my studio practice and combined it in the Cirque du Verre. It's called Synchro Blow. And so basically it's exactly what it sounds like. It's 6 glass blowers trying to make the exact same piece at the exact same time in this sort of choreographed dance. And so everyone had lights, LED lights attached to them, and we took slow exposure photos, and it was this really beautiful choreography. But for me, and I'll talk about this a little bit more when I get to my other work, it really begged a question about the process of glass making and the process of replication, and how each object is kind of imbued with a performance of its own making. And so presumably if 6 people could make the exact same thing at the exact same time, it would turn out exactly the same. And of course, that just invites failure. So this was a really fun piece, but also something that was part of a longer investigation for me about the nature of glass making.
So here's just a short teaser film before we were doing this at the Toledo Museum of Art. And it's just a highlight reel we'll show you to give you some of these pieces. And here's just, there's been such an incredible cast of characters over the years. It's hard to go through every single one, but Doreen Garner is an incredible artist in New York City. This is an incredible dancer. Brian Wilson is an incredible artist that works with Mark Dion. Ben Wright, obviously, is the artistic director at Pilchuck. The list goes on and on. There's a lot of cameos that have made incredible performances.
Yeah, so I think that this performance group was happening concurrently with a couple different things. I think that there were other people in the glass world who were beginning to approach performance in this way, also facilitated by Wheaton. Burnt Asphalt Family is one of those groups. I think at the same time, institutions were becoming more interested in exploring the performative aspects of glass. And also a lot of institutions were building hot shops. So, Charlotte will talk about this more, but in the process of us doing this, the Chrysler Museum of Art was actually in the process of building their hot shop. They hadn't built it yet. And so it was sort of a fortuitous moment to be working in performance. And I think it's kind of amazing that in the past 15 years now, we've seen a whole variety of practices that are like embracing performance in different ways, not always in the same sort of kitschy and silly way, theatrical way. I would also say that it was done here, but I think that this was an important touchstone looking back on how our practices have grown, and also as a little bit of a bellwether of some other developments in the glass world.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. The next sort of, I think, more serious curatorial project that Kim and I took on is we took ourselves off center stage. We recognized that trying to produce these took a ton of energy and effort, and actually it pulled away from the acts in a lot of ways that we were supposed to be the stars in, because we didn't have as much time to stand back, be the director, look and just observe and see what's working and what's not working. So we put ourselves solidly in the theatrical director's seat for a project called The Glass Theater.
So this was,
yeah, go ahead.
This was at the Chrysler Museum of Art, where Charlotte was the programming director and studio manager, and she invited me to come collaborate in this project. And we really, again, wanted to frame performance in a way that kind of deepened the conversation. So we curated 3 different acts, and then we also invited 3 different authors to write essays, and we had a printed program to go with it. And we wanted to make this space, it was a theatrical space, but it also was a space that kind of asked the audience to pay attention and kind of carefully consider what was unfolding with the medium of glass.
Just to highlight a couple of the pieces, this is Bo Yoon Yoon on the left, and this is Kishi Bashi, who's a musician on the right. And we put together this really interesting pairing where we asked them to collaborate. They'd never met one another before. Kishi, his parents were both traditionally trained musicians that are professors at Old Dominion University, which ironically is where I find myself now. But he beatboxes on top of his music. He uses a looping pedal that sort of plays different sounds on top of themselves. So he's basically a one-man marching band with a classically trained violin and beatboxing. And Bo Yoon had been making these beautiful musical sculptures that involved glass, materiality. Here he's forcing hot air through the bottom of the tube, and then Kay is catching the sound that comes out through the top. And then mixing it and making this beautiful musical scape.
This was a piece by Robin and Julia Rogers that was called Glass Rain. And so what they actually did was they created a small barrier and they flooded the hot shop floor. And they had this projection of this sort of like soft focus rainy night that was reflecting in the floor, and then had a casting element where they were actually casting through a grate that created these droplets of glass rain. And the performance was the unfolding of this creation of the rain. And this was a piece by Jocelyn Prince called Phantom. And so actually the entire program was called The Phantom, somewhat around this piece. And so what's happening here is that Jocelyn and her team cast a large figure, life-size figure. And you can see on the left, there's a 45-degree angle piece of glass, and that's creating what's called the Pepper's ghost illusion. So everybody in the audience does not see the glass. They see the reflection of the glass as if it's a ghostly figure, kind of like a hologram is sort of what it feels like. And the performance was the casting of the figure and then just the waiting of it to cool. And it was really incredible. It took about 15 minutes, but as it cooled, it was like you would sort of begin to hallucinate different features of the figure's face and body. And you begin to like see these things, images kind of rise to the surface. And so it was really kind of contemplative, but also exciting at the same time to watch it. And again, this is a piece that couldn't have been shown in any other space. And so we were really, really honored and thrilled to be able to present something like this.
So it takes a team. I think the number one thing that I've taken from a lot of these projects is that I think a huge part of my artistic practice is building teams, actually, and working with other people. And I see that as an extension of the practice, both as an administrator and a maker, which is a nice segue to individual practice.
So if anyone has any questions and you want to pop them in the Q&A, we can answer now, or we can keep going.
Yeah, there's none so far, guys.
Okay, cool.
Okay, we're going to power on. Sister Act. So again, collaboration. I've turns out I just like collaborating more with other people than working solidly in my studio. And that's probably because we all became glass floors because we sort of we're social animals and we like to be around one another. We will talk about the pandemic later and how that's affected all of us. But this was a project called the Sister Act. It was a collaboration between my sister here, Grace Potter of Grace Potter and the Nocturnals, a dear friend of mine, Brett Day Wyndham, who did all of the set design, and then the whole entire team from the Chrysler Museum Glass Studio. And it was a series of acts that were sort of talking about identity. I was taking a lot of the lyrics from her songs and reinterpreting them, thinking sort of about the way that both of us were evolving as people. It was really beautiful, and there's videos of a lot of the things that we're going to show you tonight on our websites if you guys want to go back and see them in longer form. At the end of the night, we lit sparklers that were hanging from the ceiling using molten glass, and then we had the artist statement from the whole performance written up as confetti and weather balloons that we popped. And so at the end, it rained on all of the audience, the artist statement for the work. Bottled Emotion is a performative piece that I've been working on for a number of years. It started out as just like a scratch and sniff study when I was studying at the Rhode Island School of Design doing my master's. Where, believe it or not, Kim actually helped me get into my master's degree. She came with me when I was a resident at Wheaton and we did a synchro blow together, and that was part of me actually getting accepted into the program. So this was a project where I just walked into the hot shop, not quite knowing what the results were going to be. I brought an oxygen mask with me, a thermometer, and there was one other tool that was medical. I was thinking about the relationship between industry and glass blowing, and I was seeing a lot of parallels between the medical industry and the glass industry. And so I decided to attach this oxygen mask to the end of a blowpipe that was connected by this tube and try to let out all of the emotion that I had. And there was a number of other people that were in the space at the same time. It became very cathartic and people just loved it. And I realized that I had really kind of stumbled into something that was really important. So I've done these performances all around the world, in Norway, California. There's probably been about 20 of them now, where I invite people to exhale whatever they need to into the oxygen mask that's attached to the blowpipe. And it can be done two different ways. Sometimes I save the pieces and display them like this, along with cards that sort of explain what the emotion was. Other times the performance is the person letting go of that emotion, and we break it right there on the spot. We collect all of the remaining broken pieces of glass, melt it back down, and recycle it. So it can exist one of two ways. It's been wildly moving. I've had people talk about losing loved ones. I've had kids who come up and just want to scream some happiness in there. It's extremely powerful. And I guess I should also mention that I always wear a white laboratory coat, which sort of makes one think that they are going into something almost clinical. And I make people do questionnaires beforehand. So I've adopted a lot of the language of the medical society and sort of this clinical feel, which in some ways gives it this level of authority that transcends even my wildest dreams of what this would have become.
Charlotte, I have a question about that piece right there. Do you anneal the glass there before it's displayed?
I do, and that's why I don't always have the opportunity to exhibit it like this, because I need a space that has a lot of and that's why often, just because there isn't annealers on site, or I use a mobile glass studio, I'm at a festival maybe or something like that, that's why oftentimes we'll just recycle it on the spot. Yep, this was from the Park School, which is in Baltimore. I was an artist in residence there for this project. Armor. So this piece, again, thinking about medical society, sort of the relationship between medicine and glass. I was thinking about how the fates of lives have been cast on these small pieces of glass, these small microscope slides. And I was thinking about what it feels like to be in your own skin, and what it would feel like to wear somebody else's skin. I was thinking about fashion. I was looking at Alexander McQueen a lot at the time, and started to embark on this really crazy project where I decided I'd recreate my entire body, every inch of my body, using glass microscope slides and silver to create a new glass armor, which simultaneously would shroud but also expose my body. Initially, I really liked the performative notion of letting somebody else wear it and like collaborating with a choreographer or a dancer and really trying to get into somebody else's skin. But the piece became so very fragile that it needed its own armature and has never been able to be worn. I'd like to talk a little bit about the role of the institution in this work. This is one of those crazy ideas that I never would have been able to do if an institution hadn't stepped up and said, you know, we want to support you making a large piece of artwork like this. Initially, it was the Shelburne Museum that said, we support you in a solo show and we'll give you the funding to buy the materials to make this piece. And then next at the Houston Craft Center, and they also helped make the accompanying work for this exhibition. The next body of work I'm going to talk about is related to social media. I'm very much interested in the ways that we connect with one another or don't. I kind of put these in the wrong order. I'm going to jump ahead. This piece is called Charlotte's Web. It's the first work that was made. It's all of my 864 Facebook friends, profile pictures, hand engraved as glass cameos, arranged on the wall, according to my memory of where I originally met them. I was trying to deal with this uncomfortable schism of meeting people in the virtual world versus meeting people in real life. It was right kind of when Facebook was coming into play, and I was very uncomfortable with the fact that there was this voyeurism that was happening. You could see people's lives in ways and be so exposed in ways that we never had been before, dealing with some of the insecurity around that. And also the role of the institution. Again, I was a resident at Pilchuck Glass School and their air program, and had a lot of time and resources without a hot shop to make something. So that meant I had to learn how to engrave. And I was thinking about how the modern day profile picture on Facebook, it was somebody in profile, like a cameo. And these are these beautiful little lockets that are all interconnected. I was thinking about the World Wide Web and how the way that we're connected there. And then from that piece, I made this piece called Pending, which was all of my pending friend requests. There was about 680 of them, arranged in accordance to where they said that they lived, according to the internet. You can also see sort of, here is the Northeast, down here is Florida, over here is California, but you can see these sort of hot spots, like this is Pilchuck up here. And they came off the wall in direct proportion to how many mutual friends we have. I had some like rules for Facebook and social media and decided that I wouldn't only accept friend requests if I had physically met the person in real life. I didn't want to just meet them on the internet. So these people, presumably I had never actually met in real life. We just had mutual friends. And to conclude this series, and this really felt like a final point, I was really sort of fascinated with modern day mourning and mourning jewelry and the way that we deal with loss. There was a number of people who had passed away, but still had live Facebook pages, and people would post on them pretty actively. So I started tracking that and collecting all the data from the few people I knew that had passed away that still had Facebook pages that were active. So every one of the beads on this represents a person who is trying to post into the afterlife. And every single one of these chains right here represents how many times they had posted onto the page since the person passed away. And this is a stippling effect that I actually researched and figured out at Wheaton, but never could figure out how to apply until I made this piece a decade later. This is the shadow on the wall is the portrait of the piece of the person. And now for Kim.
Yeah, so in terms of my own practice, I also wanted to highlight pieces that kind of came out of this relationship with hot glass performance and this relationship with Wheaton. So first and foremost, I wanted to talk about some actual hot shop performances I've done. And this one is called The One Best Way to Do Work. And this was done at Brooklyn Glass. And one of my really strong interests is an interest in chronophotography, and I'm blanking on the word, scientific something. But what it is it's the practice of tracking industrial efficiency, essentially. And what I find interesting about this is it's this method of quantifying movement around making an object. And so in this piece, I used some of that language in thinking about this projected grid that's on the hot shop. But then, of course, engaging in this activity that's totally inefficient. So what I'm doing is I'm making this large kind of lattice mountain. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But it's kind of this really enormous, fragile, ethereal sculpture that can't even really be moved and just is very temporal. And then on the right, what you see is this blob is a performer in the suit that's completely made of tulle that's mimicking the form of the glass. And as they move through the space, the projection is like iterated through the layers of tulle, and it really exposes like the sort of form of the performer, or sorry, I should say the form of the fabric. And while we were doing this, there was this audio playing that talks about the one best way to do work. And this was a paper written by Frank Gilbreth. So he was like a chronophotographer, industrial scientist. And it's just about how you should quantify skill and preserve super skill. And he calls it super skill in the most efficient way. And in another part of the space, there was a quote by Harvey Littleton, who's the founder of Studio Glass, founder, that talks about how to break an act of art making down into steps is to destroy it. And so it's these two competing ideas about glass making. So we can go to the next slide. So this is just a close-up of the piece and the performer. And it's been really amazing to go through this slide presentation about how many threads of the work go back to Wheaton. So Carmichael Jones, who's assisting me, they were somebody that I met at Wheaton who was also part of the Cirque du Verre, who was then helping in this performance. And I feel like this will come up again and again in my slideshow of how these connections have shown up in other places. So you can go to the next slide. This is a video that I just wanted to show to kind of give a sense of the material aspect of the performance. And give a little background that I did do my undergrad in glass at RISD, but I did choose to do my graduate degree in art and technology studies. And so I lived without glass for 2 solid years, probably 3. And it really changed my practice in certain ways. But what I found, of course, is people often find at grad school, that all of my interest around transparency and performance and materiality all kind of came back to this very glassy sensibility. And I think that this is just a good example of how that sort of worked. So basically, you know, I created this Tyvek suit and I probably sewed 300 yards of white tulle onto it, and then just did this very kind of slow moving performance in front of this video projection. Okay, you can go to next slide. And this is a piece called Revolutionary Light that I did at the Design Museum Ghent. So again, John Moran, who I met at Wheaton, has since moved to Belgium, and he invited me to do this. And this was a kind of 5-act performance where I explored ideas of light and power and like power transmission through hot glass. So this was kind of just the initial start. You can go to the next slide. Mark Barreto was my co-performer. He's working with me here. And so we did a synchronized glass blowing performance where we made light bulbs. And you can go to the next slide. And then what you see here is a light bulb, not the one we made because that did not anneal in time, but a light bulb. And what you see on the right is a copper grid that is not connected. And when the hot glass touches the grid, it creates it allows the current to go from one part of the grid to the other, and it illuminates the light bulb. So the light bulb lights up and then slowly cools. As it cools, it slowly darkens. You can go to the next slide. This is just some slow exposure photography of us working in tandem. Next slide. And then the final part of the performance was we had pulled all of these fiber optic cables. We created some glass rain, and then we had handed out LED lights to everyone in the audience. So as the fiber optic cables were illuminated, everyone in the audience also had this piece of light that they were kind of holding on to connect them to the performance. So some of the themes in that performance work kind of circles back in what I would call studio work. So if you go to next slide, this is a piece called Old Venetian Glass, and you can see that the work in synchro blow and the slow exposure photography just led directly to this. And this I also made as a year at Pilchuck Glass School. That support from them was super important. And what I did was essentially took 2 LED lights and took these 20-second slow exposure photos of me replicating objects from this book called Old Venetian Glass. Fortunately, 72 objects fits into a grid just perfectly. And it really was a way, again, so I'm like living without glass, but I'm like living in my glass brain. Like that's what's happening here. But it was a way to really think about this idea of the relationship between object and body, this relationship between the replica and trying to replicate something in the impossibility of that, and the beauty in the imperfection of that. And also kind of like nerding out about Venetian glass at the same time. So if you go to the next slide. So this is just a close-up so that you can kind of see. And then this piece was made in 2013, but it informed a piece from 2019. So if you go to the next slide, what I did was, in terms of thinking about the replica, I went back and created goblets from the light drawing rather than from the actual original, and then reiterated again and created a 3D print from the light drawing. So going from the 2D back into the 3D, thinking about these layers of translation and the problematic parts of replication. And then so these works were shown all together. In this case, the image is a large aluminum print that's like 21 by 33 or something like that. And then the objects are actually to scale. So this one's actually quite small. It's something like 7 inches. And I've made a series of 7 of these, but I would love to make the whole series of 72. But one of the really interesting things about making things to scale is you really understand how much you misunderstand the scale of something. Some objects were so much smaller than I imagined them, and some were so much larger. And so that challenge as a glassblower was a really exciting challenge. Next slide. And this is another series called Lattice Mountains. So these are really also informed by performance, a performance approach. So if you go to the next one, this is a piece I made at the Toledo Museum of Art. It was part of a residency for the 50th anniversary of Studio Glass, which began in Toledo at the museum. And it was part of a 1-week residency to celebrate that. So we did that with Matt Zoss and Amber Cowan. And I really was thinking a lot about the glass studio as like a modernist art studio. So what happens when you strip away all the benches and all the tools and all the stuff that's telling you what to do, and you just live with the furnace? And the furnace, the small furnace, was kind of the primary technology that allowed us to have glass in the artist studio. The furnace wasn't big and industrial, it was small and it could go in your garage. And so that was like this really primary technology. And so I just worked with the furnace and nothing else besides a punty, really. And I made a lot of nothing, but then this object sort of started to grow like right before my eyes. And it was this really performative process. Again, it's a public hot shop. People are coming in and watching you work, but it also became this really exciting, like formal process, but also, creating an object that really, this object is in a collection somewhere, but yeah, it's hard for it to live and survive kind of beyond its making. So if you go to the next slide, this was a piece Charlotte invited me to do at the Chrysler Museum. So it was part of like a 2-day kind of ongoing performance that then resulted in that object they displayed in their window. Next slide. And then I actually did ship it to Heller Gallery. That was the end of its life after that. But it came with this certificate of transience that kind of tried to codify the nature of it, that it would change over time, that's part of the piece and it can only exist in this way. And so this would accompany the piece. Next slide. And then I had the opportunity to do this one more time at the Toledo Museum of Art for a show called Playtime that really tried to have the objects in the museum and the programming around the exhibition be of equal importance. So this was really a performative piece that unfolded during the Playtime exhibition, and then this was displayed in their open courtyard at the Glass Museum, or the Glass Pavilion. So you can go to the next slide. So this is kind of, it was huge. This was kind of the scale that we were working on. And you can see the furnace behind me is the furnace that we built for the residency 3 years prior. And they hauled that back out and put it on the lawn. It was great. Okay, okay, great. So I don't know if any questions came up in the Q&A. Looks like no. So
no questions so far.
So we're going to talk a little bit about institutional life. I think one theme that's gone on is that institutions have been really important to us as artists. Opportunities to make things at Wheaton, at Pilchuck, at Urban Glass, all the places that allowed us to perform at Chrysler, where Charlotte was the director. Those have just been critical in terms of the trajectory of our work and our careers. And so it's also really great now to be a part of an institution and informing those trajectories for other people. So I'm currently the chair of craft and material studies at the College for Creative Studies in Detroit, Michigan. So it's a small art and design school there. So if you go to the next slide, this is our beautiful campus. And my role there is really as an educator and as an administrator of the program. And I have to say that I really love working with students striving for their bachelor's degree over the course of 4 years. I definitely see so much growth and exploration and just the world opening up to them in terms of what glass is and what it can be and the connections that can be made. Charlotte's actually coming in a couple weeks to visit us as part of a career panel that we're doing. And, I would say that my undergraduate education has really heavily informed me. I'm still working with some of the same themes. And so I feel really lucky to be a part of that for students. So this is our furniture studio. Next slide. This is our glass studio, of course. We have a great facility. And I would say, you know, the culture in Detroit is so rooted in making and so rooted in materials and material studies. It's been really, I mean, I feel like for me, it's been really different than my experience like on the East Coast. And it's been very exciting to see how students really dig into materials and making at the school. Next slide. This is our blacksmithing shot. So I just gave you some sexy studio shots so you can see what it's all about. Next slide. And so I also wanted to talk a little bit about my role as, I guess you say, a scholar, independent writing and curating. This is something I've done more of as of late. If you go to the next slide, one exhibition I wanted to talk about is actually opening today, and it's called River of Shadows at Heller Gallery, and it's available online as well as in person. If you find yourself in the New York area, you can schedule time to go there. And there's also going to be a Zoom panel on Saturday, so not to, you know, cross promote too much, but I see there's some artists from the show in the audience, so I'm so glad you guys could come. So this is a piece of mine that's in the exhibition. I'll show you a preview of a couple other pieces, but I did want to talk about this because I think in this piece you can see the interest here in how the body and performance informs the object and the aura of the object, and thinking about how you know, every object kind of contains the memory of its own making, and trying to explore that here. Go to the next slide. This is a piece by Rebecca Cummins, and it's strobe photography of a bullet going through this really beautiful Dante Reticello piece. And I mean, if you don't love that for obvious reasons, I don't know what to tell you. It's just this really great kind of negation of this just incredibly crafted object. Next slide. This is a piece by Ethan Townsend, who I think is here. Hi, Ethan. And these are really incredible photographs of a process where he's actually flinging glass and capturing the movement while it's hot. And although these look small on your screen, the actual size of these would be 8 feet across. That's how far the glass has flung. And I think it's such an incredible representation of the movement of the material in its molten state, which we're all really mystified by. Next slide. Piece by Dylan Brahms. He has taken a 15-year journey of trying to perfect the Ambulina. And so he's layered a variety of his attempts over these 15 years to create different types of images. This one is called Failure. So he selected his worst ones from the 15 years. And so in the same way that glass moves so quickly and you make it so instantaneously, this progression of skill is actually quite slow and incremental over time. And I love how this piece expresses that. Next slide. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the Venice and American Studio Glass exhibition at the Stanze del Vetro in Venice. I was really lucky to be a part of this exhibition with the piece Old Venetian Glass, the print that I showed earlier, as well as to be able to contribute to the catalog to talk about methodologies in 21st century studio glass. And I think that Venice has been so informative on the American glass scene, but in different ways for different generations. And we can talk about that more if there's interest, but it was really a satisfying project for me to get to dig into that and also kind of dig into the work of my contemporaries and think about that. So if you go to the next slide. So this is actually a virtual tour of the museum, which you can do now. I'm just gonna, you know, this is just a minute long. And I'm just gonna kind of talk you through. But on the left, you know, you can see an image of a piece by Marg Circle and Alex Rosenberg, and way in the back, Norwood Viviano. My piece is on the right, and you can see that it's in this room. James Mongrain is in front of us, Kathy Gray there in the center, Beth Lippman on the left, and David Schnuckel, who's also in River of Shadows on the left there. And, you know, COVID or not, I would have not been able to go to Venice, but this virtual exhibition was such an amazing way to get to see all these pieces and how they exist together in space. So this is just going to go on for a minute longer. You can see the Fred Wilson that's on the right, the Black Mirror, Stephen Powell's really large panels. And as you spin around, you can see Norwood Viviano's piece, Walter Lieberman, And if you just get a little closer, Josiah McElhaney on the left and Nora Viviano on the right. So this is just a taste of what's in this exhibition. It was curated by Tina Oldknow and William Wormus. And if you have an opportunity, you can also go to the Stanze del Vetro website and check it out. And lastly, I just wanted to talk about a piece, a show I curated for Habitat Gallery in Royal Oak, Michigan. So they're right in my backyard, called Street Craft. This was a really fun exhibition. It was all about artists that are looking at the street and street art in different ways. So this is an install shot. You can see the big Mataskuki in the middle of all glass crafted trash. If you go to the next slide. This is an install shot as well. And I'll talk about just a couple of these pieces in more detail. But I was really excited to work on this. I felt that this was kind of a perspective that is really present in the glass community. I think clearly a lot of artists are interested in a counterculture aesthetic and are expressing that in different ways, but I'd never seen it come together in a show quite that way. So if you go to the next slide. So I just want to talk about a couple artists in the show. One of the really cool things was having Swoon in the show. If you're not familiar with her, she's a street artist that's, does a lot of wheat paste on different cities. I would say kind of like working in the same vein as Banksy, but also does really large museum installations and paper and cutouts. And she had these glass pieces where she's actually has paper adhered to glass windows, and she agreed to include these in the exhibition, which is really exciting. If you go to next slide. We also, included some really cool collaborations by flame workers. So Bandu Dunham and Robert Mickelson made this really crazy marble run that had like graffiti and lights and like everything on it. It was incredible. And Carmen Vetter, who was an artist I wasn't familiar with before I began researching the show, just had made these incredible panels that felt like this like paint peeling wall kind of like falling apart. They were really beautiful. So a lot of the work that I discovered in this query were things I wasn't familiar with and was really excited to get to curate. If you go to the next slide. And then Deborah Cheresco, who also, has been a really big presence at Wheaton, created these large icky sticky bubble gums to go in the exhibition. Okay. Now give the floor to you, Charlotte.
Okay. So now I want to talk a little bit about the way that institution has shaped my life and the way that I've maybe shaped some institutions. The Chrysler Museum Glass Studio, this is a picture actually from the opening night. Was there a question?
Yeah, we do have a question, guys. So Ethan Townsend, you both know, says temporality seems to creep into both of your works, intended or otherwise. How do you let it inform the work you make and perform? Do you find yourselves trying to fight it and make object/documentation last? And as glass blowers, there's often a pull to make sure hot object reaches the annealer. I'm curious how your practices interact/address the ethereal.
The ethereal, yeah. The transient and things that don't last. This is funny. We're going to talk about like kids pretty soon, some point in their lives. But I've been showing my daughter, a lot of videos lately about performances, which is like a thing I was about to start to show. She's like, "Mommy, why do you guys always break it?" And she was really upset about the transience of the glass, and it was really upsetting to a 3-year-old. And it's interesting to try to figure out how to deal with that, both for the audience and for yourself. Kim, do you want to talk a little bit?
Yeah, I would say, it's a really big problem. And sometimes it's a good problem, and sometimes it's a really challenging problem. It's hard to make work that doesn't survive. I think even if there's sort of this, esoteric or philosophical idea about things being ephemeral, it's hard, and it's hard for the audience. But on the other hand, it's really hard to keep work forever. And speaking of babies, like your artwork, it's like is this going to be in my basement for the next 18 years? And so I don't really have a good answer to the question. I mean, in some ways, documentation becomes the answer, where the piece becomes a photograph, or the piece becomes a video, or the piece becomes like just remnants and detritus, and that is what it is. But I don't think that's like, it's also clean and kind of wrapped up in that way. And I just want to say I was really struck. So the Glass Educators Exchange put together this lecture series, and I was watching Thurman Stathem's lecture, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with him, and he was talking about how much work he just throws away. It's just temporary. It's these large sheet glass architectural pieces, and I was just like struck by it, like, and I couldn't decide if I'm like, oh man, that's so great, like you make it and you're done and it's gone, or if it was just kind of like also really sad that all these beautiful things just kind of are temporary and then kind of go into a dumpster. So I think that it's problematic. It's not easy to
I would say that I think that's one of the reasons why I got so attracted to performance, was that the work was building the team, the work was putting together the production, the work was the documentation, be it video or photography, but the work was not the stuff, the detritus. And that felt really freeing to me as a maker, to not have to like contend with all of this stuff I made. And I think it's pretty ironic that I've ended up being the interim director of a museum that collects and has like this massive collection of things that I now have to maintain and care about. And this other way that I don't even care about sometimes with my own work. I mean, I have thrown away so much work. I was looking at the crate with armor in it the other day thinking, probably no institution wants my naked body ever. Probably this is going to sit in this like coffin for a decade. Maybe it'll come out for a retrospective, but do I care? And like making these like I just had the PS piece that I showed earlier broke in transit when it was going to the museum, and the museum said, you know, do you want to try to fix it, or do you want to get paid by the shipper? And that was a really tough moment where I was like, no, I'm not going to kill my child. Like, I'm going to try to fix this thing. And I called my husband. I was like, this terrible thing happened. Like, oh my God, when my babies died. And he was like, honey, take the money. We need the money. We got 2 kids. Like, it's not about the work anymore. And I was like, what? You know, so I just think that it's really interesting. The rubber hits the road on a lot of these issues. And it's true. It's not something we always talk about.
We have another question, and you guys can either answer it now or if it fits into your talk later. But someone has asked, has COVID impacted teaching and learning within your programs?
Yeah, we're going to address that pretty heavily, but we could jump into it now if you want, Kim.
Yeah. Whatever you guys want.
I mean, I think this is an okay time. I mean, it has affected it heavily. I mean, I can talk a little bit about what we've done at CCS, and maybe Charlotte can talk a little bit about her experience. But, you know, basically the nuts and bolts of everything that has been able to be put online has been. Now for us in the glass studio and the craft and material studies department, there's a lot of things that don't fit into that. So we've had really strict room capacities, you know, mandatory mask wearing, and just a kind of mandate to students that they need to really contain their contact outside of the studio and inside of the studio. And I have to say, I really have to commend my students that they've taken it really seriously, because they see their studio access as like their primary concern. And so we've had, you know, and there have been all these little innovations that have been so cool, like the port and the mask, you can put your blow hose in, and like the foot pedal, you can blow it up, and I have to say that's been really cool. We've been doing a lot more like video meetings and video conferences, but you know, fundamentally, you gotta look at work in person. And in my case, we just had the governor create an order where we had to go start remote learning 2 days before our final crit, which was today. And so we had to do it over Zoom. But I have to say, had that not happened, we were ready to like just look at work and be outside in 30-degree weather and just talk about it outside, so that we could actually be in person as safely as possible. So I think there's challenges with working, but I think viewing art, communicating about it, like all of that has really it's really made me rethink how important some of that like physical presence really is.
And I think what I would say is that it's allowed us to kind of like do some homework that I don't know that the institution would have been able to make time for if it wasn't for the pandemic. I'm always into looking for the silver linings for things because there's a lot I could talk about that, you know, like all of, when I was first hired at the Barry Art Museum, I was supposed to be working primarily on engagement and education, and all of those initiatives just came to a halt for in-person programming, obviously. We had to shift completely and pivot into a digital platform, which has been really rewarding because I realized that all of these materials more evergreen. Like, yes, we're missing that like performative component of the few people who are there get to experience whatever we're going to do. But now we're creating this stuff that can live on for perpetuity, you know, coloring books, surveys, a 3D virtual tour, a new website. It's really exciting to see when people, especially when artists are given all this time, what they come up with. We have an artist, we have a talk similar to this series, and we just did one with Karen Lamont. And one of the most fascinating things that she did is she finally did her homework to like document all of her research and what she's interested in video form, in these short, like 3 to 5 minute videos, explaining all of her thoughts around certain bodies of work, which, you know, when you're really hot to trot in a certain body of work, you're really interested in it. And the research is there, it's right at your fingertips, it's the tip of your brain. And she's taking a moment to like freeze that moment in time and really talk about what she's doing. And I thought it was the most dynamic artist talk that I've seen in a long time, because she's to show a video and then we talk, and show a video and then we talk. And so, you know, some of my other friends that work in institutions are taking this opportunity to finally do videos of all of their demonstrations for, you know, glass casting and how you make a casting. And now they get to use that for years to come. You know, and in fact, I wonder if it's going to help us as educators and as teachers to get people further along in a semester. If you assign a homework assignment to watch this movie, you don't have to sit there and watch the person make the whole thing. It's like a cooking show. And then by the end of it, it's like, okay, well, maybe we can get to like 4 more projects I never imagined we get to, because in theory, you can cover that information earlier. So, you know, there's good and bad things with the pandemic. You know, we were closed for months and months, and we're open with the university with all the same stringent guidelines. And, you know, we might have to close again if the numbers continue to get so crazy. So was there any other questions that we should address now, Pam?
No questions at this time. We're good.
All right, cool. We're in our last little section here, and then we can talk a lot more. But I want to touch, I know we've sort of talked about the Chrysler Museum Glass Studio a couple times. This is what it looks like. It was a renovated bank building. Beautiful travertine on the exterior. When I showed up, it was a construction site. I was handed a hard hat and some blueprints, and they said, go. It was a really fun project to build an entire facility and all the protocols and all the ideas and all the programs from the ground up. I was there for almost 7 years. But to give you more of a sense of what the Chrysler Museum of Art is, because it's such a gem, I'm going to play a video.
What is it that inspires you? Maybe it's humanity, culture, knowledge, creative innovation. Maybe it's discovery. A journey to the unknown. Whether it's love, adventure, family, exploration. Whether it's art, performance, creation, community, or an astonishing mixture of it all. One thing is certain, Chrysler Museum of Art has an experience for you.
So that's what the institute, let's go back. View. That's what the institution has to hold. And then across the street, there was this cool glass studio. Oops,
what is
hold on.
That inspires?
Here we go. So this is just a recap of the performance glass program that I created and formed completely from my time at Wheaton and my collaborations with Kim over the years to create the first of its kind dedicated program just to performance glass. And it's a monthly program. It still exists. It's called Third Thursdays. They've even done some digital ones during the pandemic, actually. And in some ways, I think it's better because yes, you're missing the audience and the live component there, but perhaps if we can reach so many more people virtually than we ever can in person, maybe they can get better camera angles and they can start thinking about completely different kinds of productions that are designed specifically for the viewer in a digital format. Anyway, here's just a few highlights. It's just fun. It's a funky video of a bunch of the kinds of wild stuff that we did. So this is our donor wall. And you'll see a lot of cameo appearances from a lot of incredible artists. Did a lot of really fun collaborations with NASA that's right up the road. We would collaborate with comedian groups. This is Tutsinski. I think it's when Deborah Teresco came and made the world's largest ornament, maybe. Randy Walker. Amanda Soderbergh, Robin and Julia Rogers. Maureen Garner again. Tom Rowney. So I ended my time at the Chrysler, as hosting the 2017 Glass Art Society conference. I sort of felt like we'd reached our pinnacle moment. I'd done the best I could do. There was no more ways to go up from there. And then and I was starting a family. And for me, I just had a newborn daughter, and I really felt like it was time to return to my family. So I moved back to Waitsfield, Vermont, and got pregnant again really quickly. And while literally in labor with my second child, was interviewing to become the executive director of Yestermar Design Build School, which is sort of the Pilchuck of architecture schools, and it just happens to be in my hometown. It's a really incredible program. If people don't already know about it, I just wanted to take a minute because this is a really incredible audience to get to know another really amazing resource. The tagline is think with your hands, and it inspires people to create a better, more sustainable world by providing hands-on education that integrates design and craft as a creative and interactive process. So this is a much shorter video, but it's a short one and it can say it in a much fewer words than I could say it. So I'm going to let them say it for me.
I keep coming back to Yes Tomorrow because I think the mission is so important. It's to get people turned on to the experience of designing and building, you know, identifying a problem, trying various solutions, implementing the solutions, seeing what works, what doesn't work, going back to the drawing board, so to speak. Just that process. It's so exciting, invigorating, empowering that you want everybody to have an opportunity to do it. One could do it other places. One could do it with years of instruction and experience. But the beauty of Yes Tomorrow is you can come and take an intensive course, be it 2 days long, 2 weeks long, 4 months long, and learn in that short period of time what it would otherwise take you years to learn. I'm constantly amazed at the community that's here, that has endured, that continues to grow and is looking towards the future. Many of the students who come here call it a life-changing experience.
So Yes Tomorrow was really kind of an extension of the work that I was doing at the Chrysler, and that it was about building teams. It had an incredible internship program. Oh, I totally didn't even mention that one of the big things that I did at the Chrysler and then here as well is build off of my experience as being the first ever assistant at Wheaton, and taking that knowledge and building other assistantship programs other places. I really feel like that tacit knowledge that you get through something like an apprenticeship is critical in our craft society. And I really value it. I think it still has a place here. And it was amazing to be able to sort of help shape more young lives. The program here is paid. That's one thing I was very happy I was able to do. So people get paid, they get free room and free board, and there's an incredible food program. We grow all of our own food there, and everything is locally sourced. It's super crunchy and really amazing, and I'd encourage you guys all to check it out. This is something that they built this year. It's on the left-hand side, it's a tree house with some really fun design. And on the right-hand side, this is the Snail, which was my childhood's bus stop that we are moving from the corner right onto campus. And I'm still sort of involved in leadership there because I can't let go and I love it so much. But moving on to the Barry Art Museum. So I came onto the Barry Art Museum in January 2019. 2020, sorry, just this year. The Barry Art Museum opened to the public in November of 2018. It was founded by Richard and Carolyn Barry, who are incredible art collectors and philanthropists that decided they wanted to make sure that they could keep their entire collection intact and create a public space on the campus of Old Dominion University. We have growing collections in international glass sculpture, 20th century American modernist paintings, historic dolls, and European automaton. It's free and open to the public. Again, a video tells a million words. It's short, and you get to actually see what we're talking about. Oh, no, we don't need to see it again. It was good the first time, thank you. So just a little bit about the Berry Art Museum. I think I can't take a ton of credit for the way that it was incredibly installed due to Annette Page was the founding executive director, and she did a lot of these pairings. Really, really thoughtful pairings like this, where you sort of transcend time and medium to talk about different themes. So, you know, be it still life, you know, on the left, Flora Mace, and on the right, we have Alfred Henry Moore, and thinking about the way that you don't have to know a lot about art to understand these kinds of relationships. You might not need to know anything to recognize that there's visual relationships between a Reticello glass piece and Rockwell Kent's A Beautiful Moonlight in the Adirondacks. There's a lot of kind of quirky and weird, which brings me back to Wheaton all over again, because Wheaton, I mean, I remember the wood whittler that was like, you know, over in the corner making these crazy crafts. And these pieces are real masterpieces. This piece blows my mind. Every single one of these little tiny gems is a Stanhope. So if you look through them, they project images of Paris. And on the backside, there's a kaleidoscope you can look through to see all of them at the same time. It's nuts. And pieces like this, that this is another automaton and a really beautiful doll, French fashion doll. So that's it. That's the end of the presentation about the Berry Art Museum. Thank you for listening to me rattle on about institution for a while.
And I think one thing I wanted to touch on, you know, Helen had a little comments in the chat, but she had to go. But one thing that was promised is some mom talk, some talking about momming. And I think that that's something really important to talk about. I think that, you know, normalizing parenting as a working person, human, woman is really important. And I think that that's really been informative on our practice and just how we're able to approach our practice. And yeah, I mean, I think that our kids are basically the exact same age.
We've had synchro lives ever since we did synchro.
But you know, we were talking before this talk and talking about actually how the pandemic has affected our practice in an interesting way, in that now that we can't leave the house, along with everybody else, it's enabled our practice as a parent in certain ways. So, you know, for me, I think, you know, not being able to travel has been really challenging in my practice, and now nobody can travel. And so having virtual exhibitions and having talks that are virtual and doing things across the country from your home has actually been really a great way to enable, you know, a dialogue and a conversation about my practice that if I had to travel to Wheaton tonight, I don't know if I would have been able to do that. So that was just something I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, agreed. I think I'd have to say that as a parent, it's made me so much more envious isn't even the right word to use, but reflecting on how much time residencies had and how much time as a student you have to invest in your work and be completely, maybe narcissistic, I don't know, but like completely enthralled in this thing, that there's never time like that again after kids, you know, and it's always these little snippets of time. There is no travel. Trying to travel with young children is just crazy. I can't believe Kim went to Venice for the, that was nuts that you went for the Glass Art Society conference. But in general, I do think that the pandemic as a parent has been really interesting, because it's made me, the FOMO has gone away, seeing everybody else having time to do all these things. Nobody has time to do these things. We're all in it together now. It's not just parents versus single people. And so in some ways, I feel like it's allowed me to participate more with this community that I was feeling really isolated from because there wasn't time for. I will be completely honest, I have not been able to, I haven't made a single piece of art since I've had 2 kids. That's not true. I finished one commission that was started before I had children, but I haven't been able to make one new piece of art. And I think that's something to normalize and talk about, that artistic practice, as much as we'd like it to be continual, and you know, I'd love to do one of those mom residencies where I do a drawing every day, but it's not practical. It's not fitting in. And this is real. We're telling you in real time that there is no time. The practice is now working for the institution and bringing and propping up other people's careers.
There's another question that says, do you plan on reviving Cirque du Verre ever again?
Yaz is one of my students. We talk about it all the time. We've been talking about it for the last 10 years. When are we going to do it again?
It will happen. We'll do it.
So yes, but we don't know when.
Not with toddlers.
No.
So I'm just looking through here. I think this is your student. She says, hold a casting call, please.
Open call.
Well, we'll hire you. We'll hire you. Yes, we'll bring you on. No audition needed.
And of course, Susan Gogan, our executive director at Wheaton, has thanked you for being on with us tonight and also for being involved in our institution in more ways than one. As you know, it is, artists come in and out of institutions in so many different ways and stages of life. So thank you guys. I'll echo that. Thank you for being part of our institution.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you for having us. This is really fun to come together for this.
Sure. So I'm not seeing any more questions coming in. If anybody has any questions, please type them in now into the Q&A. We'll give you like a few seconds to do that.
Maybe the one thing that I would say is that, you know, that call from Yaz made me think, if you have an idea, don't ever be afraid to pitch it to an institution. You know, every institution I've worked at, you know, there's proper channels, like you apply for a thing, but then there's improper channels where you just reach out to somebody and say, I have this idea. I think it's really cool. I don't know, maybe there'd be a place for it in the future. Could you just want to keep it on the back burner? And I can't tell you, I have a file of those that I go through and I think like, oh yeah, that person pitched that thing like 2 years ago. We should bring that to the Barry. I totally couldn't bring it to the Chrysler, but maybe in this new role, this would be the right way to bring it to life.
Great. All right. Well, no questions following that one. So I think we can begin to wrap it up. I definitely want to personally thank you both for being here. It was an absolute pleasure to get to know your work all over again through this program and through all of our pre-conversations leading up to this program. So thank you for all of that. And then Marcy, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, again, thank you both for this really rich experience that you brought together for us all of inspiring work, your experiences, the performances, and the institutions in themselves that you continue to immerse yourself in. And I love how you talked about, Charlotte, the helping other artists or propping up other artists. And it's brought up wonderful memories for me too, especially that Cirque du Verre. I did put several links into the chat, and again, your websites are up here, and thank you all for a lovely evening. And we will we would love to hear from you. Pamela especially would love to hear if you have any other ideas for programs and anything else that you want to chat into Pam. And just a couple more reminders for the evening, and that is that I did put the link to the next Wheaton Conversations with Norwood Bibiano and Dr. Jen Kitson in the chat. If you'd like a copy of that chat, you can email Pam or myself. And that one last reminder for shopwheatonarts.org, especially this time of year, there are still some pumpkin selection. Sketch Mannion has been working very hard behind the scenes at Wheaton Arts. And there are some surprises coming at Shop Wheaton Arts as well. So keep your eye on that to see what else Sketch puts in there. And don't forget that we're open Saturdays and Sundays, 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. And you can get your tickets there as well. Thank you all, and I wish you good night. We'd love to hear from you. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.